feel both incredibly old and long-lived. This presentation shouldn't take more than 10 to 12 minutes. And it's really interesting listening to the presentation prior, because there is definitely a lot of synergy and points which were raised before that you'll hear again within the course of this presentation. So that's a good sign for me. That shows that we're all pretty much coming from the same place or the same set of experiences that we've been through over the last 14 or 15 months. So let's begin. As you can see from the numbers on screen, Lloyds Banking Group is the largest retail bank in the UK. So the division of the bank that I work in, Group Transformation, is the digital section of the bank. We are here to support the entire group and all of the brands that you can see on the screen, helping them transform digitally responsibly. GT, or Group Transformation, is a division of 16,000 employees in the UK and with a series of partners globally as well. And we work in cross-functional teams. And as it says on this particular slide, our work impacts on 30 million personal and business customers. So it is incredibly incumbent on us to do the best work we can to serve the customers and communities that we work with. So from our perspective, Storytelling was set up in 2018, and our role was to tell the story of the biggest digital transformation program in Western Europe. So the budget for Group Strategic Review, which was the last 3 years of digital progression and evolution, was around £3 billion, so a fairly chunky budget. Our role there is to document that transformation and communicate its progress internally to our colleagues so they know where that spend is going and what that transformation looks like, and externally to interested parties. Those parties could be stakeholders like our investors, it could be the government, lots of people that are interested in the work that Lloyds are doing. Now, what this session is not going to give you all of the answers. You know, it's not 100% cast iron guarantee. There was a little bit of clickbait in the start of that introduction. But what we can say this presentation is it's really a summary of some of the learnings that we, the business, have made in the last 14, 15 months. Some of those have come from our organization and some from the partners that we work with. As we kind of go in this new period, not quite the new normal, but certainly a place and a space where we're trying to work out what our model is for colleagues moving forward. One thing I did want to say, just in terms of context, and I've heard this quite a lot, is working from home. We have most definitely not just been working from home. You know, we've been working within our homes during the most impactful set of circumstances that have affected us for a generation. And that plays out in, you know, the universe and the numbers that you'll see. So I did a bit of research and saw that, you know, in April 2021, Microsoft had somewhere in the region of 150 million daily users of Microsoft Teams. If you spin back to July 2019, that number was only 13 million. So you have seen a more than 10-fold increase in less than 18 months. That's how much of an effect the pandemic has had on the way in which we work and the way in which we connect with each other. Now, from a Lloyds perspective, over the summer, we are hoping, based on the government guidelines, to be able to reopen most of our office spaces for colleagues to return if they choose to do so. Now, within the questionnaires and surveys that we've done with our colleagues, around 80% of people have said they want more flexibility in the way they work. The average that we're hearing from colleagues is something in the region of 2 days being in an office and 3 days being remote based. So over the coming months, there are some really important decisions that we need to make in terms of how we organize ourselves in the short term, but also how we think about ourselves and our office space moving forward for the next 2 to 3 to possibly even 10 years. There was a great piece of PR that was done around 6 or 7 years ago by a US tech company, which was basically asking a question of what are people doing when they are meant to be focusing on remote calls. And I'm sure at some point today or in the last year, you have come across the results of this research. Now, let's be honest, this was a very much a PR-led campaign, so designed to gain attention. But nevertheless, there is a grain of truth that does exist within there. So if you look at it, the first three make a degree of sense. More often than not, and I heard this in the last call, how often are we actually 100% dedicated and focused on the presentation that we're seeing or hearing, whether it's on Teams, whether it's a Google Hangout, or whether it is on Zoom? 65% of people pre-pandemic were saying that, they were doing other work at the same time they were connecting on a call. 63% on emails and 55% eating. Then it gets a little bit weird. So, I think one of the things you need to have a little think to ourselves about is, looking at these 8 or 9 things, how many of them have we actually done whilst we're meant to be connected and focusing on, creating culture, delivering great work with our colleagues? Obviously, I will say I have done none of these things because I'm 100% focused on all of the calls that I'm having. Though I am slightly concerned at the fact that 9% of people who responded to this survey said that they were exercising. How the heck you can do that whilst connected to someone on a Zooms or a team call, I'm not entirely sure, but it's interesting to say the least. So what I'm going to talk to you about is 4 or 5 frameworks that, as a team and as an organization, that we have been trialing and working with in the last 12 to 14 months. The first of those is to counter what we call drift, or that lack of active participation in remote meetings, which again was referenced in the last presentation that I overheard. Most of the time, the reason for that is that we're not actually catering for lots of different learning and communication styles. Being on a screen is actually within a 2-dimensional environment. And that is actually really difficult sometimes for people to connect with, as much as and as great as digital is. For certain groups of people, that's a really difficult way for them to be able to learn, communicate, and connect with the world. Now, most of you will be familiar in some way, shape, or form with these communication and learning styles. And it's absolutely imperative, if we are going to stop drift, that we need to connect with our participants with each of these styles. So visually, the research says that around 60% of people communicate with concepts and imagery. So that's how they're stimulated. Around 25% of people fall in that auditory tranche. They're the people that want to be connected through sound and cadence and rhythm. Around 10% of our populations, theoretically, are there and want to get involved in active participation. They're the people that want to look at data and read it, write, get on a board, use a sticky note. And then 5% of that audience, or 5% of our population, are those people that like to use both sense and touch, their kinesthetic ability to be able to learn and to interact with colleagues. Now, that's really hard, and I think it's very interesting from a psychological perspective to think, as we move into a new normal, how is it that we are going to be able to help and support those colleagues that fall into that kinesthetic tranche, those people that actually learn through touch and their senses, compared to the other 3 tranches or categories? Again, one of the things I've heard earlier today is, it's really important to settle and use the tools that are available in whatever digital platform you're using to engage with your colleagues. So whether it is polls, whether it is using video or audio or breakout rooms or whiteboard sessions, as per the last session that I'd heard, those are great ways to create a more likely engagement with people within your virtual spaces. The second thing I just wanted to reference was the idea of balance. This is super important. Now, there is some recent research that talked about, on average, remote workers in the last 12 months or so have been working, on average, an extra 2 hours per day. Now, that equates to around 64 additional unpaid days in a year. Is it a surprise, therefore, that people are sometimes tired, that they are sometimes not engaging? That lack of delineation between work and play even in those jobs that we absolutely adore and love, is making our lives far more complicated than it did in the before times. Now, in this new working world, it's really important that as groups, as teams, as labs, as constructs, as organizations, that we spend time discussing and agreeing what the expected behaviors are within our teams and our organizations. That way, as a group, you're all really clear on what the culture is, what the expectations are, and everyone's aware of what the red lines are that separate what those work and those personal spaces are. The third element that I just wanted to reference was, again, looking back to balance, but also thinking about environment. Our working environments impact on our ability to both be our best and to perform at our best. One of the things that has definitely come through over the last 14 months that we have been in this pandemic and remote working is that we may well be on the same ocean, but we're all on very different ships. Now, for some of us, remote working has been a boom. We've been in a situation where we have office spaces, where we have a designated chair, a designated desk, and all the peripherals we need to do to be our best. There are colleagues, some of which I'm aware of from within our organization, who have really struggled with their environment, where literally their daily commute is they get out of bed, they take 3 steps, and then there is a desk at the end of the bed which has their computer on it. Though that is a very big challenge in terms of a working environment and working remotely. So it's really important that when we're setting up our calls or our team interactions, that we just take some time out to think about our participants' environments and just make sure that we are positioned, or they are positioned, to be the optimal version of themselves. This can often mean sometimes that actually it takes a little bit of time for everybody to sync within a meeting. And it's definitely worth, again, I heard previously, to take a little bit of time to do that. So to give everyone the opportunity when they arrive at a meeting, either cold or tepid or warm, just to give them a little bit of space, whether it's through a moment of levity, i.e. getting people to show their phones, or just a little bit of time for everybody to sync and make sure that you're all heading towards the same place. So just think about the mindsets that your participants are in or need to be in to get to your desired outcome. Another reference I've seen a couple of times today is just around this idea of pre-planning. There was a great piece of research which I would definitely get people to take a bit of time to search for, from an agency called the Behavioral Architects. The Rise of the Zombie. I think it came out around 4 or 5 weeks ago. Now, one point that was referenced in the document is the speed at which people put remote meetings in and the lack of planning that goes into those meetings also. So within a virtual environment where everything can happen faster, we do tend to end up in a situation that people aren't putting the same level of thought and planning into what they are doing compared to what they would have done in the in-person world. In the real world, most meetings, organizers are primed to facilitate a well-run meeting. Over many years, we've learned that it's important to have an agenda, that we pre-supply packs or executive summaries. We even got to the point where we're thinking about seating arrangements or refreshments alongside clear objectives. It's super important in this digital and remote space just to make sure that your attendees are primed. There's a clear agenda. There's a sharing of pre-meeting materials, that people are encouraged to have that interaction, so all participants actually participate in the meeting, and everyone has a super clear sense of what the expectations are and the outputs. So prime your attendees so they arrive prepared for success. The last and the final framework I just wanted to share was just around the limits to a degree of digital. Now, according to Aristotle, who was a philosopher from 2,500 years ago, humans are social animals and they seek companionship of others as part of their well-being. Now, you can debate whether that interaction has to happen 100% in the physical space, 100% in the digital space, or it's a hybrid of both in our modern world. But we are definitely missing in this virtual remote working the connections and of the informal environments. We are missing out on those moments of the coffee, the hallway conversation, the end of desk chat, really those moments of serendipity. And I think it's super important for all of us not to necessarily in this interim period where we are in the biggest change that has happened in our environments in the space of a year to rush to get to answers very quickly. This is absolutely the period for testing and learning and thinking to ourselves, what are the projects that actually benefit having an in-person experience versus the projects that actually benefit from having a non-physical experience? There are no definitive answers, but one thing is definitely certain. There is no platform that exists or will exist that will be able to replicate every single facet of human interaction. Right now, we're just trying to figure out our limits. So right now, it's all about testing and learning, and then trying to work out what are those projects that need the in-person experience and what don't. So a quick summary. As I said, we are in a state of flux. Within our organization, we are running a number of behavioral and workplace experiments, trying to assess and see how we maximize and use our office space and not returning to the before times where actually people would be commuting for an hour to come to an office to spend 7 hours sending emails to each other. That is not the optimal way of working. It was the way of working, but the one good thing from the pandemic is it has given us the opportunity to be able to step back and look at things differently. We need to be incredibly empathetic, I think, about the environments that our colleagues reside in and our participants reside in with our cause. You know, it is a range of different personal circumstances. And I, for one, have spent many hours of mirth watching people's cats jump onto screens, children wander into meeting rooms. I say meeting rooms being the smallest room in your house, and getting to know my colleagues a heck of a lot better. These 5 frameworks represent the start of Lloyds Banking Group's journey. And it's very much all about planning and testing and learning, and with a greater level of, interaction, with better efficiencies. I think we will get to a place where when we're having digital participation, that works a lot better than it has done previously. So that is the end of my presentation, and thank you.
Mark, thank you very much. Really intrigued to hear those thinkings there and how we can apply to that, and especially that idea that